In our previous video, we broke down the many central flaws of the Saharan hypothesis using architectonic, historical, genetic, and archaeological evidence to show that the ancient Sahara cannot adequately explain the origin of the material cultures of modern Africa, namely West Africa. Today, we will delve a little deeper into some more fatal flaws of the Saharan hypothesis, and why its proponents, mainly those who traffic in West African tribalism, are unknowingly promoting white supremacy in Africana scholarship. The ancient Sahara lies at a crossroads between African civilizations and those of Eurasia. It features many genetic theoretical models such as the Great Back Migration, along with hypothetical populations such as the Basal Eurasian. Historically, numerous Western scholars have used the Sahara as a springboard to promote their Hamiticist theories that claim that white Caucasians pastoralists from West Asia descended into the Saharan zone and are responsible for African civilizations. Though the ideological descendants of these Hamiticists can vary, they are typically represented by modern Berber or Amazigh nationalists who promote the idea and concept of an indigenous white African, or an African who doesn't represent the stereotypical image of a black person. Is there any evidence of these white Africans? Well, Cheikh Anta Diop documented the incursion of leucoderms, or those with pale skin, into Africa during the pre-dynastic Amratian culture, also called Nakata, one around 4000 to 3500 BCE. Diop made it clear that these pale immigrants did not change the bioevolutionary trajectory of the ancient Kemetic people. However, throughout classical African history, the Remenkemi often had conflict with the ancient Libyan people and sometimes depicted them with pale skin. This takes us deeper into some of the issues with the claim that the Sahara is the true cradle of African cultural unity. It opens the door for covert Hamiticists and white nationalists to steal African accomplishments and denigrate the legacy of African people. The Bovidian period is the major era of Saharan pastoralism, where we find the majority of the petroglyphs that depict the inhabitants of Tassili Niger in Algeria. According to archaeologist Andrew B. Smith, one of the major artistic styles of the Bovidian period featured people with pale skin, long hair, beards on the men, and long dresses on the women. This is similar to the depiction of some of the Timahu by the Remenkemi. Smith associates this art with so-called Proto-Berbers and cites skeletal data identifying them as Proto-Mediterraneans. When it comes to the black faces of the Bovidian pastoral period, the conventional view is that they represent the ancestors of the Fulani people due to the many faunal rituals such as Brushgate Latori ceremony seen within Bovidian rock art that are observed today among the Fulani. However, if one considers the fact that the Fulani have a European lactase persistence gene, the fact that African pastoralism originated along the Sudano-Chadian border, and that the Fulani autosomally cluster close to the Omotic Ari people in East Africa, it is clear that the pastoral culture entered into the Western Sahara from the north and east, and that Eurasian carriers of a lactase persistence gene played a role in that process. It is clear from this data that these white Africans were a significant portion of the Saharan population during the pastoral period. The advocates of the Saharan hypothesis, who claim that Saharan pastoralists represent the historical cultural cradle of modern Africa, and that these Saharan pastoralists are the primary ancestors of ancient Kemet and modern West and Central Africans, they are saying that white Africans are the initiators of African civilization. That brings us to Tichit. There has been a lot of controversy, namely by the advocates of West African tribalism, about who founded the ancient Tichit culture. The reason why this is controversial is because these West African tribalists want to connect with the Wagadu civilization that is also known as Ghana. Even though there has never been an identifiable operation sequence that connects Tichit prototypes with ancient Wagadu and the overwhelming majority of Soninke artifacts with respect to regalia, systematic theology, literature, and armaments have prototypes from the Pharaonic civilization, the advocates of West African tribalism foolishly choose to promote the outdated tradition of isolationism with respect to the development of West African civilizations and cultures. They claim that the founders of the Tichit culture were Proto-Mandi speakers. This is hilarious when one considers that Tichit is a Berber toponym. If Tichit was created by Proto-Mande people, why don't we have a Mande term for that culture? Furthermore, according to Kevin MacDonald, The Hod Depression that houses Tichit was filled with lakes during the Holocene optimum 9,500 to 5,500 years ago and only began to dry up 6,000 years ago before accepting incoming so-called Niger-Congo speakers 4,000 years ago. The exact point when the aforementioned Mandi speakers would have entered into West Africa. It is clear from the material record alone that trying to connect so-called Proto-Mandi people with Tichit in the absence of historical comparative linguistic reconstruction is immature. Kevin MacDonald also cites research compiled by Patrick Munson, who has provided evidence for the invasion and defeat of the local Tichit culture by North African Berbers during the late period. This was supplemented by intensive cultural syncretization, which would affirm that North African Amazi played a primary role in the last vestiges of Tichit. If we are to accept a continuity between Tichit and Ouagadougou, even though there is virtually no archaeological evidence confirming this continuity was established by these so-called white Africans. This is yet another major L for the proponents of the Saharan hypothesis as it concerns West Africa, and another win for the racist white nationalists promoting Berber nationalists. As usual, comparative Africana studies will save the day. If we consider the material culture research of Kevin MacDonald that affirms that the pre-Tichit Akrijit culture was dominated by hunter-gatherers. According to Lipson's genome-wide analysis of foragers in Cameroon, these ancient West African hunter-gatherers would be descendants and derives from the Shumlaka culture. They combined incoming pastoral technologies from northern and eastern Africa with their local foraging practices, and in turn developed a complex society over time. The Binford-Myers model states that both incoming pastoral traditions and local hunter-gatherer strategies played a role in the onset of agricultural production in Tichit. Musalam, in his analysis of Soninke oral traditions, along with a comparative archaeological study of the area during the Chebka period and the terminal Akinjeyer period, confirms that the Soninke people, who were masters of Equus ferus caballus, which is a species first domesticated in ancient Kimi, migrated into the Mauritania area and defeated the indigenous Kokoro people, who they identified as the founders of the culture now called Tichit. They represented one of many populations of Africans who migrated from the Hapi River Valley in East Africa into West Africa. Historically, whether we are dealing with the early Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, Late Stone Age, African Humid period, etc., it was Hapi River that helped populate the cultures and civilizations of the ancient Sahara, and not the other way around. The Sahara cannot be the cradle of African cultural unity because it does not have enough explanatory value to articulate the true origin and purpose of the material cultures of contemporary Africa. Despite the uproar of West African tribalist neophytes, it has been repeatedly affirmed both here and throughout the Africana academic, social, and cultural universe that the Hapi River Valley continuum is the culture cradle of African unity. Without it, there are no evolutionary roots of modern African societies. For those who advocate tribalism and the eternal ethnic separation of Eastern and Western Africans, these facts are a nightmare. However, for those who are the advocates of Pan-African unity, the truth presented here will be liberating.